Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and I'm doing this podcast on a future machine. That's right. I'm riding a bicycle while I do this.
Oh, yeah. The future is here, my friends, in this film, but we are going to the past, as we always do, and beginning our new season on the year of 1969. So 31 years in the past. I think I did that math correctly from our previous season, back to the 60s for the second time that we've done a season on a year from the 60s. And as always, we are beginning with the box office champion, and that is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a year in which the number one movie at the box office could be this kind of languid Western. Always amazing to see stuff like that.
Newman and Redford, come on. The two,
right.
Maybe the two big, those two and Steve McQueen, Sidney Poitier, probably the four biggest movie stars at this point in time, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm joking because, of course, if this movie were made now, it might not even make it into a theater, but you're right.
No, you're wrong. It would have like Timothy Chalamet, right? And Austin Butler, and the trailer would have like a remix of like Old Town Road, Little Nas X in the background, and it would be like you ain't seen a Western like this before, and it'd be like a big action thing or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't sound that bad actually, but no, but you're right. This movie stars to the Timothy Chalamet and Austin Butler of their time, two of the biggest stars.
You're really giving a lot of credit to Chalamet and Butler if you're comparing them.
They're all right. Two. They're very famous. They're good.
I just don't think they're Newman and Redford.
No, but so. I mean, I'm not talking about their talents. I'm just saying in terms of fame.
Which Kardashian did Paul Newman date, Josh?
I don't think they were born. Maybe he dated Robert Kardashian or something at that time. I don't know. Even he was probably. Let's move on from that. Anyway, this movie was the number one movie at the box office in 1969. It grossed $102.3 million on its budget of $6 million. And not only was it a box office success, it was big at the Oscars as well. Nominated for 7 Oscars, and including Best Picture, it won 4 of those for Best Original Screenplay for William Goldman, Best Cinematography for Conrad Hall, Best Original Score for Burt Bacharach, and Best Original Song for Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, sung by B.J. Thomas here. Was also nominated for Best Director for George Roy Hill and for Best Sound. And just a whole ton of other awards, including 9 BAFTAs that it won. Best Picture at the BAFTAs, was nominated for 4 Golden Globes and 1 Best Original Score there. So really just a sensation here in 1969.
It was nominated for 10 BAFTAs, and the only BAFTA it lost was Paul Newman lost to Robert Redford for Best Actor.
Right.
Which is strange. I mean, Newman carries this movie, but that's cool. No big deal, right? I mean, they both did all right. What I wanted to say, Josh, and I think this is going to be a recurring theme on this season, is like you name-checked Awesome Movie or All-Stars there. We've talked about George Roy Hill. We've talked about Paul Newman. We've talked about William Goldman. We've talked about Conrad Hall. So I think we're going to get deeper into a lot of characters we've already explored.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, like these are 2 of the biggest stars, and these are some of the biggest names of this era. So we have of this era and other eras, and so we have talked about some of their other work. And in terms of that award, I mean, I think this was a little earlier in Redford's career. This was more of a breakout role for him, whereas Newman was a bit more well established at this point. So maybe that is why Redford had kind of that extra little bit of momentum at the BAFTAs to win that award. Interestingly, neither of them nominated for Oscars, though.
You know what I found interesting, Josh, is I think you're bringing up a good point in that, Redford, sure, there's humor. It's a William Goldman script, so they get their jabs in. But, Newman's the real, kind of jokester of the bunch, and Redford's more serious. And not to say he doesn't do that very often in his career, but often we see him as the jokester, kind of lovable type as the lead going forward.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, in both of them, and this is a very jokey movie, and even though the Sundance Kid, Redford's character, is maybe he's a little more quiet, he's a little more withdrawn. He gets his little cute lines in there too.
He gets his zingers in.
He does. This is a movie full of zingers, for better or worse.
Yeah, I think, and that's a fair point. There's a lot of funny stuff, but the jokes are the same on both sides, right? Like you could just mix them up, and this guy says this, and this guy says this. There's no real separation of the style of humor for those two.
Right. And I think as you're saying, oh, Newman plays this kind of character and Redford plays this kind of character, but really the differences between them as characters, as people, are very minimal. It definitely feels like Goldman is kind of writing the same guy and just switching up the lines.
I think the humor is similar. I do think Newman's the more jovial, and like you said, Redford's the more reserved of the two and a little more serious here and there. And Newman always thinks they'll find a way out of the trouble, whereas Redford's like, there's more trouble.
Right. That is the idea. Butch Cassidy, Newman's character, is optimistic, perhaps undeservedly so, as they are on the run from the various forces aligned against them, these two Western outlaws. This is based loosely on the true story of these very, very famous outlaws from the Old West, and opens with that. I feel like something that, I don't know if this is the first movie that ever did it, but that you see so much now in movies that are supposedly inspired by true stories, where it's like, this is true, except when it's not true. Ha ha ha. And that's kind of that, not literally, but that's essentially what we open with this movie.
Well, I think that's okay. I mean, look, we've talked about George Roy Hill and William Goldman before, and they both like to play with the form, whether it's different types of media or film stock or, people watching movies in Hill's case. And then, as far as storytelling, if we look back to Princess Bride, it's a story within a story, as both stories unfold. So Goldman does a lot of that, I'd say, where he's kind of playing with the art of storytelling.
Right. And he said something, I didn't get the exact quote, but I saw somewhere, Goldman, of course, known also as a novelist, and that he didn't write this as a novel because he didn't want to do any research. So he's basically just making it up for his own enjoyment, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not saying it's bad.
I have this quote from Goldman, which is not the same, but it tells you kind of the impetus of the story. The whole reason I wrote the thing, there's that famous line that F. Scott Fitzgerald said, who was one of my heroes. There are no second acts in American lives. When I read about Cassidy and Longbaugh, which is Sundance's real name, and the Super Posse coming after them, that's phenomenal material. They ran to South America and they lived there for 8 years, and that was what thrilled me. They had a second act. They were more legendary in South America than they had been in the Old West. It's a great story.
And I mean, it is certainly not the kind of thing you expect from a Western, or especially I think that audiences expected from Westerns at this point. So he's right that it's doing something different with this story of, again, characters who are very, very famous in terms of Wild West outlaws.
Goldman said that every studio passed because they were on the run. And in Westerns, the heroes don't go on the run. You never see John Wayne on the run, I think was one of the quotes of them. But, that's what's great about William Goldman. He's always playing with form.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that the way the movie works is because they're on the run. And that's a lot of what the humor is, that these are guys they're not cowards, but they're very interested in self-preservation. And so if that means running away, if that means going somewhere else, then that's what they're going to do.
And it's also, a last resort. They did have that super posse of lawmen on their tail that they couldn't shake. So they're like, we don't have a choice anymore. We got to go.
Right. So critics, surprisingly, especially given all the awards attention, not just the box office popularity, were not that into this actually in 1969. Of course, its reputation has grown a lot, but at the time, reviews were fairly mixed. Roger Ebert, in his review, said, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid must have looked like a natural on paper. But alas, the completed film is slow and disappointing. This despite the fact that it contains several good laughs and 3 sound performances. The problems are 2. First, the investment in superstar Paul Newman apparently inspired a bloated production that destroys the pacing. Second, William Goldman's script is constantly too cute and never gets up the nerve, by God, to admit it's a Western. Goldman has his heroes saying such quick, witty, and contemporary things that we're distracted. It's as if in 1910, they were consciously speaking for the benefit of us clever 1969 types.
Yeah, well, we just said that, right? You know, that it's very kind of tongue-in-cheek and zippy and quippy and everything. But what was the first point he made in there, Josh? Can you repeat that?
He says the investment in superstar Paul Newman apparently inspired a bloated production that destroys the pacing.
I don't see how that would destroy the pacing. What does that have to do with the pacing?
I mean, I guess the idea that, you know, everything has to be big and lavish and more set pieces and more locations, and that kind of drags it down. I don't think this is a poorly paced movie. It's not that long.
The pace is very easy and, you know, one to the next. Like, it's very linear. The links all kind of connect. So I don't get the pacing. And I also don't understand why hiring Paul Newman would have anything to do with the pacing of the movie. That's what I'm confused
Well, I
about.
think the idea, and another review, maybe not one that I ended up quoting, pointed this out too, the idea that because they presumably spent all this money on Paul Newman, that they then had to spend a bunch of money on everything else. Like, they had to make this production a big deal, a big thing. And again, if like they put more locations and more set pieces, and that bloats the movie. And I don't know if that's really, I don't know if that connects or if that really tracks to me. And I don't know that that's something that we really think of now about movies with big stars. If anything, I feel like what happens now is it's like they spent all this money on the star, so they didn't have any money to spend on other things.
I'm just really confused by this whole thing, because like, isn't that part of the charm of this movie, or like the big stunts, the big set pieces and everything like that? I don't get it. I don't know where that's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that point of view, but I do feel like, even though, as you were just saying, like what's unique about this movie among Westerns is the idea that they run away, you know, to South America and they're trying to start new lives or whatever. But I really felt like the movie kind of slowed down and dragged for me once they went to Bolivia. And I felt like it could have been tighter. But at the same time, I feel like Ebert and whoever else I read this from is exaggerating the way that is happening.
I think your criticism is fair. I'm just not seeing how hiring Paul Newman like led to that. Was there anything in my research? I didn't see anything. Newman demanded this, or Newman said we got to
No. I don't think it's
so.
the idea. It's not the idea that Newman demanded it. It's the idea that once you have Paul Newman, big star, you have to make a big movie.
Right. So I guess we didn't find anything where it said Goldman wrote a draft and then Newman came on and then they had to blow it out.
No.
I mean, and
critics at the time wouldn't have known those things anyway. They're just speculating.
Yeah. Well, as you can see, Josh, we're already off to a rousing start of full confusion for me in 1969. Summer of Love, Summer of Confusion.
All right. Anyway. I feel like it's not really like, I mean, you know, I don't necessarily agree, but I feel like I understand what they're trying to say here, at least.
I definitely don't.
Okay. So Pauline Kael in The New Yorker was also not a fan of this film. She said, "It's a facetious Western, and everybody in it talks comical. The director, George Roy Hill, doesn't have the style for it. He doesn't really seem to have the style for anything, yet there is a basic decency and intelligence in his work. The tone becomes embarrassing. Maybe we're supposed to be charmed when this affable, loquacious outlaw Butch and his silent, quote, dangerous buddy Sundance blow up trains. But how are we supposed to feel when they go off to Bolivia, sneer at the country, and start shooting up poor Bolivians? George Roy Hill is a, quote, sincere director, but Goldman's script is jocose. Though it reads as if it might play, it doesn't, and probably this isn't just Hill's fault. The dialogue is all banter, all throwaways, and that's how it's delivered. Each line comes out of nowhere, coyly, in a murmur, in the dead sound of the studio."
You'll have to excuse me. There's a lot of words I have to look up to.
she
Jocose.
Yeah, I mean, it's jokey, I think is what that means.
Yeah. I mean, look, so we're again repeating this idea of like it's too quippy, too jokey, and that's fine. I didn't see anything in there that would make me think that George Roy Hill wasn't up to task as a filmmaker behind this, or didn't have the right style for it. That one confused me. Josh, where am I missing all this stuff today, Josh? Did I watch a different movie than everyone?
Yeah, I don't agree. I mean, the idea that, I guess there's two things, she's saying maybe he's not right for this material, and that's fair if that's her take on it. But the idea that he doesn't have style, I mean, in a way, this movie is too stylized, I think, at times. He's really into these montages and the still images, and it opens with that like sort of old timey, like old two reel silent film imitation of the hole in the wall gang, and sometimes it's almost a little distracting. So I feel like he's trying hard to make this movie visually, stylistically interesting. Sometimes maybe too much so. Although overall, I didn't think that stuff was bad. So, I mean, she maybe feels like it's a mismatch between him and the screenplay. I don't necessarily think that.
I don't either, but maybe she wasn't serious. Maybe she was just jocosing us.
Mm-hmm. She could be. That was a improper use of that word, but I appreciate your efforts.
I did it on purpose.
I know. So John Mahoney in The Hollywood Reporter had a much more positive take. He said, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid has both William Goldman's justly expensive screenplay and two stars who could not be better fitted to the realization of the title roles. Thus inspired, director George Roy Hill's intelligence and craft have never been so clearly and confidently manifest in bringing to screen the aggregate virtues of the ingredients. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is the story of two of the most likable outlaws in Western history, researched in facts and conveyed in joyous contemporary spirit, employing the broadest spectrum of creative techniques to sustain the timeless aura of legend and the vital, damned fool heroics of its characters. It is a great film and will be an exceptionally popular and profitable one.
Well, that guy was right.
Yeah, he sure was. I mean, not that Ebert or Kale are saying that this movie won't be successful. And Kale, in her typically like extremely long reviews at other points, she talks about how this will probably be a big hit and how that's like depressing to her and stuff like that. So, it's not that they don't expect it to be popular.
It's so funny to think back on like this, and you're looking at it and like, almost like, oh, this is the type of fare that Newman and Redford take on, like they're just pop idols, and now we just think of them as absolute legends, right?
Right. Or the idea that this was some sort of like vulgarization of cinema or whatever. Whereas now, as we're saying, like if they made a movie like this and it even got released in a theater, we'd be amazed. But at the same time, I mean, and I think this movie is very entertaining, but I do think especially the points about the jokiness of the screenplay are fairly spot on. As much as you can watch this movie and enjoy that and laugh at it, to me, especially this time, felt like I could draw a clear line from the kind of writing in this movie to the kind of like overly cutesy, jokey writing in like a Marvel movie.
I might use this as a puzzle piece when I do Deadpool and Wolverine in a couple of weeks.
It absolutely could be. That's actually, I mean, not having seen that, but I bet that would connect.
I've seen a good amount of Westerns. You've probably seen more. I'm just trying to think like, was using the Western as a comedy just so anachronistic to the genre at the time that turned off critics?
I mean, I think there are other Western comedies. I mean, something like Destry Rides Again with James Stewart.
Or the Marx Brothers Go West. There's stuff out there.
Yeah, but I feel like a lot of those are more slapsticky, whereas this is more about, the quote, witty banter. And I mean, you can't blame William Goldman or George Roy Hill or anyone involved in this movie for what influence it might have had decades later on movies that were bad. But at the same time, it definitely struck me watching this movie that if Butch at one point had been like, so that happened, I would not have been entirely surprised.
But he didn't, right? So, I mean, you're saying that would be the rote, like tired version of it. And while the style of humor is a little too matched or repetitive, they're clever lines. Like it's William Goldman here, right? He's not going for the lowest hanging fruit or anything like that. He's a very smart writer. So I just think there's we're muddling the waters here, Josh. It's like we're jumping off a cliff to escape the posse. And I'm trying to land in the water, but you keep landing on the rocks.
So I'm dead, I guess, is what you're saying. I don't think you could. Well, no, I mean, and my point is that this is still enjoyable. That whatever influence it had later on is not, again, the fault of anyone who is involved in making this movie. And it is more clever than crappier versions of that. But at the same time, I don't discount the criticism that it's kind of too jokey or superficial or whatever.
Sure, I'm okay with that. I mean, look, if we're going to do the worst version of this, I guess Wild Wild West, which we covered, right,
yes.
is one of the worst movies of all time. And, the humor just falls completely flat, as does everything else in that movie. So, again, it's not to say that Redford, even more than Newman, in my experience, like, not to say that they haven't made bad movies, but it's tough not to like a movie when these two guys are in it.
Yeah, they're very likable. And I think that carries it a lot, too. I mean, as much as Goldman has written those clever lines, they're so charismatic that even if the writing was worse, it would still be enjoyable to watch them and watch their performances.
Right. See, now we're on the same page, Josh.
Okay. So had you seen this before, Jason?
Josh, we watched this in film club with Tony Macklin back in the day. That's where I saw it the first time.
I must have too. You know what? I think I forgot that was when we saw it. I remember having seen it at some point in the past myself. But yeah, I guess we must have watched this together. And I feel like I liked it more that time. And then this time I was maybe a little more aware again of those criticisms, but I still enjoyed it. So
also, that was a communal movie experience. And now you're sitting all alone by yourself.
I am. Yeah. Friends. I mean, communal, it was, 3 or 4 of us or whatever, but, maybe we had some laughs together when we watched it.
Yeah. Some guffaws. We all sang Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head together.
I doubt we did that. So, Dave, had you seen this before?
I hadn't. And speaking of experiences watching it, I should have watched it just a couple of weeks ago. I was in Circleville, Utah at Butch Cassidy's hideout right across the street from his childhood home. That would have been some fun social media stuff for this podcast episode.
That would be great. So wait, so you can rent out the hideout as like a Airbnb now?
The hideout is just a little side of the road, middle of nowhere motel, and that's where we stayed for a wedding when we were out of town. And then right across the street was his childhood home, like a little shack,
Is it like a museum now or something?
I think so. Yeah. We just kind of looked at it from the street, but it was right there. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been good. That Butch's real name, Robert Leroy Parker. And as they say in the movie, Sundance's real name, Harry Longbaum.
So anything else you want to mention about the background of this film, Jason?
Josh, I can pop a wheelie on my bicycle.
Congratulations. I don't think Butch can do that. Although considering how newfangled the bicycle is, he learns to ride it really quickly.
And, that sequence is where they play Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. And here's a quote from Redford on that. When the film was released, I was highly critical. How did the song fit with the film? There was no rain. At the time, it seemed like a dumb idea. How wrong I was, as it turned out to be a giant hit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like both of those things can be true. Like the song Divorced from the movie was a giant hit, and it could still be a dumb idea to put it in the movie.
But it wasn't, because it's one of the most memorable things about the film.
I guess I could have done without the song, really. But we'll maybe get more into that when we come back and talk more of our general thoughts on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this premiere of our season on the films of 1969, we're talking about box office champion Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And just going through the critics, we've had a lot of criticisms here thus far of this film, but I did enjoy it, and I think, Jason, you did too. So, I mean, what's your favorite thing about this film?
Well, I mean, I've said it in the past. Paul Newman is him and Duvall are probably, and maybe De Niro, Pacino, of course, right? But my favorite actors of all time, and I know everyone, De Niro, Pacino, Brando, this, that, right? But Newman and Redford should both be in there. Duvall should be in there, obviously. So I just love watching Paul Newman. I don't think there's a more charming actor in the history of films than him. Like, he's just so likable. And I know he's played bad guys and stuff, but how do you not want to just like be that guy's friend?
Right. I mean, I think, as I was saying earlier, like both he and Redford are so charismatic and so likable in this movie that even if at times the writing is questionable, they're always watchable. You always want to see what these guys are going to do next. You want to spend time with them. And whether this is historically accurate, I'm guessing not. They make them into these kind of gentleman thieves who are always trying to be courteous. They never want to hurt anyone or whatever. And so, I mean, I guess you could say they're anti-heroes in that they are robbing banks. And as Pauline Kael pointed out, especially when they go to Bolivia, it's like you're kind of robbing from poor people here. But they're so likable and you want to root for them to get away. And they make that super posse into this just like faceless mass. You never see those guys. And so they're not characters that you care about. And you got to have actors who are charismatic enough to make that work.
Yeah. So the super posse, when they get released on them, is an amazing kind of film sequence where they're robbing the railroad and this like kind of unidentified train car pulls up and the door opens and all these lawmen come riding out on horses. It's really cool. And then they chase him for like 20 minutes and the chase gets repetitive. I think that, there are repetitive elements of this film and those are the things where I think it gets dragged down.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the repetition is, I think, what they're going for with the humor. I mean, there's the recurring thing that every time they think they've done something clever and gotten away.
Who are these guys?
Right, exactly. They didn't get away, and right, they're like, who are these guys? Yeah. So, but I agree, it did seem repetitive, and certainly it's a deliberate choice to not make those pursuers into real characters or to ever show you them. But I feel like that's another thing in Westerns, even if the outlaw is like the main character and the one you're rooting for, there's always there's no antagonist essentially in this film. There's no antagonist character, right? It's just Butch and Sundance, and then Etta, played by Katharine Ross, who is Sundance's girlfriend, I guess we could say. And they're on the run, but from this kind of nebulous threat.
Yeah, like that new Mission Impossible, The Entity.
Yeah, they're on the run from the entity. But in a way, they might as well be, right? Or this posse might as well be like the Terminator, right? Because they can never shake it, and no matter what they do, oh, there it is. It popped up again. There's LaForce and his straw hat or whatever. That is how they distinctively identify him.
And that, I hear what you're saying. That would have been a juicy role if written, right? As like the ultimate lawman who's chasing him and always gets close but never gets them, and kind of gives us the opposite point of view. I don't care how charming they are, what they're doing is illegal, all that stuff. So I think that's fair. I just keep thinking about Goldman and how he's always kind of playing with traditions and kind of moving away from them and like kind of changing them with whatever sleight of hand, sleight of writing, whatever you want to call it. And so I get it, but I do think that would have been an interesting element to add.
Yeah, and I'm not even necessarily saying that it should be there. I'm just saying that that's what you expect. And as you mentioned, Goldman, who is trying to subvert expectations, I think here, I'm sure deliberately decided, hey, let's not make this a character. Let's not give this person any lines. Let's not show them on screen. And so that we can just focus on the relationship between Butch and Sundance. And it really is about that. We have early on, we see some other members of their gang, they come back to the hole in the wall, and the one guy kind of tries to challenge Butch for the leadership of the gang. And then I did love, we have the other guy who he's the one who reads the news, and his name is News. And, he's kind of an amusing character, but they fall away pretty quickly and we don't ever check back in with them.
The point of that, I think, is to show the loyalty between Butch and Sundance, and, the idea that they'll always find a way to get out of jams together.
Right. And that is clear, right? And that they're loyal to each other. And, the guy challenging Butch for leadership tells Sundance, like, hey, once I win, you're welcome to remain in the gang. And Butch says, hey, if I lose, then kill this guy. And of course, that's what Sundance will do.
Right. I think the high points for me, like the ending of that chase with the, kind of jump off the cliff is iconic, right? But I do think the train robberies that's where the humor is at its best, and also the kind of relationship between the two. The guy in the train who's like, well, I would look, if it was my money, I'd get out of the car, but I've been empowered by no less than E.H. Harriman to protect the money on this train car. And it's funny because like it's all the stuff we still hear today, like, about employers. Do you think they care about you? Right? Like he would fire you in an instant and move on, and but they take so much pride in the job. I think that was a really good bit both times.
Yeah, I like that. And that is, of course, the fact that it happens twice, right? He's so devoted, and then they have to blow it up in order to get in, and he's all injured. And then they come right back around as the train's going the other way. And there he is, patched up, once again saying, hey, I'm sorry, I can't let you in. And then they sort of trick him into opening the door by pretending to be an old lady. And again, these sound like, as Dave was sort of saying, these all sound like things that Deadpool would do, really. And, but it is funny. It is entertaining. And I think you're right that that's probably the most effective humor in the film.
Thank you, Josh.
You are welcome.
But, you mentioned Katharine Ross.
Yes.
She doesn't have much to do in this movie.
No, she really doesn't. And it's disappointing. I forgot to what degree she was in the film. And, seeing her in the opening credits and then when she first shows up and there's that fake out scene that I thought didn't really work very well.
Right. It's like they're role playing, right?
Right. And you're meant to think that Sundance is going to like rape her at gunpoint and then like, haha, he's not. They know each other. And I didn't think that worked at all. But once she's introduced, I thought, oh, she's going to have some sort of substantial element. And she really doesn't. I mean, they sort of like indicate the idea that maybe she's into both of them and they're almost in this like throuple or something, but they never really do anything with that. And, she gets one moment to kind of stand up when they're going to go to Bolivia and she's like, look, I'm not going to watch you die or whatever, but you don't really get the depth of her character and what she might be going through as she's always wondering is Sundance going to come back or is he going to get killed this time? And she's a good actor and she's another one that we've talked about multiple times, but I agree. They kind of waste her character.
And Josh, speaking of the motivations, we know she's a school teacher, right? So she's shaping the youth of America. So it would have been nice to hear like, kind of her reasoning of like, obviously you would think most school teachers are on the side of good. Like, why would she choose, supporting the outlaws instead of that?
Right. I mean, and again, the way they're presented, they're almost, I mean, even though they're not giving to the poor, but they're almost like, Robin Hoodish or whatever, in that we root for them and whatever. But you're right. We never get quite, and especially I thought the transition between, oh, she just loves Sundance. And so she's waiting at home and he's out doing crime. And then when they get to Bolivia, you see the first time that they rob a bank and she's out front as sort of the getaway driver, the getaway rider on a horse. She's actively helping them rob this bank. And why it kind of, I mean, they don't have a gang anymore, so I guess maybe that's part of it. But that transition seems a little unmotivated.
Yeah, I guess she's just like, hey, well, when they get to Bolivia, it's like very, let's say, unmodern, shall we say, right? So I think it was just like, hey, there's nothing else to do here and we have to make money. The other name that I saw for her was Jacqueline Bisset, but I don't think it would have mattered who played it. I just don't think there's enough meat on the bone. But one interesting thing I did see was that Warren Beatty was one of the names who was up for Sundance, I think, and he turned it down because he thought it was too similar to Bonnie and Clyde. And I think that is a much better version of like the male-female outlaw relationship and showing those motivations.
Right. Well, and of course, in that movie, obviously just compare the titles, the central relationship is that male-female relationship versus here, where the central relationship is the friendship between Butch and Sundance, and the female character is kind of off to the side. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde, which we've also discussed, is a much darker film, but it even has a similar kind of ending. And I saw that compared in at least one of the reviews here, not favorably. And I think that the ending of this film, like the ending of Bonnie and Clyde, has become iconic. And I do think that it works. And it even sort of fits with the lighthearted tone because of what they do with it, because of that freeze frame. Even though it's this dark moment, they let you end on sort of like the memory of the banter between the two characters and fill in what obviously must have happened on your own.
Right. I agree. He's got that joke in there. They're surrounded by Bolivian military and Butch says to Sundance, there's just one guy out there, right? And then they come out guns a-blazing. The other names, Josh, that I saw for Sundance, Steve McQueen, obviously biggest movie star in the world at this time, but I don't think the humor might have gone that way. And then Jack Lemmon turned it down because he didn't like riding horses. And Jack Lemmon, comic genius, we know that. So.
He is. Jack Lemmon is great, and that would have been an interesting take on Sundance. I think that could have been fun, but I'm with you, Jack Lemmon. I don't want to ride a horse either, so I'm not going to star in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I'm sorry.
Josh, do you relate to the song "Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy"?
I'm going to pass on that one. Any other supporting characters? I feel like, again, this is a thing where anyone else who shows up makes even less of an impression than Katharine Ross. But is there anyone else in the?
Well, I mean,
cast?
the dude, the dude on the train who was, who played the guy on the train, Josh? Woodcock, George Firth, right? Who was often in Stephen Sondheim shows on Broadways and Blazing Saddles and Shampoo. I thought he really owned it. I mean, Strother Martin, we obviously, I think we've talked about him before as like the old crotchety Western guy. Percy Garris in this one, he's worked a lot with Paul Newman and John Wayne. So I think those would probably be the two that I remember most.
Yeah, I mean, Strother Martin makes an impression in his brief appearance as that the owner of was it a mine, I guess, that they go work at when they try to get legit jobs in Bolivia. And then it's kind of sad when he almost immediately gets killed, because we actually did get some personality from him. I liked seeing Cloris Leachman as the prostitute that is sort of Butch's regular favorite or whatever. And she has a fun moment where she's kind of talking away and taking off her clothes and, oh, Butch, you're so much more considerate. And, all the other girls are jealous. And meanwhile, he's like crawling out the window.
Yeah, no, I love, and I've said it on here, I love Cloris Leachman. I don't think there's a better comic actress of the 20th century. But you have her, you have Kenneth Mars, who we've talked about from the producers. You have all these people, and Sam Elliott's in there, right, as a young card player. But really, they're all like, kind of window dressing for the two leads, I'd say.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, and that's ultimately what happens to Katharine Ross, too, even though she's in it a lot more than anyone else, and that the relationship and the banter between the two of them is all that the movie really cares about. And anything else is just sort of, as you said, like window dressing.
Yeah. So, but hey, man, Newman, Redford, people respond. I mean, and we see this even better. I guess this is more of a legacy thing, but just a few years later, they both reteamed with George Roy Hill and made The Sting. And that's one, a great movie, but two, just like, it took over the entire world, took over the Oscars, took over everything at that point in time.
Right. And you can imagine that. I mean, obviously, all three of them must have worked well together when they made this movie. But even that aside, you can absolutely imagine some studio executive watching this movie and saying, we got to get Redford and Newman together again because of the chemistry that they have. It's clear that these guys should be, a team going forward.
Yeah. And I think, that's what's interesting if you compare these two, right? Like, they might have even elevated that chemistry in the next one.
Right. In The Sting. Right.
Yeah.
Not in Butch and Sundance 2.
No. Or The Sting 2.
Right. They're not in The Sting 2 either. Yeah. But yeah, that's absolutely true. And as you said, that movie proved to be even bigger in terms of awards and all of that. So this is kind of where that begins. Dave, thoughts?
Dave, you lived with Butch Cassidy in Utah. What do you think?
Yeah, I spent the whole night with him.
Did it look similar to what you saw in reality?
It actually did.
Oh, right.
It looks exactly like it. Yeah, but no, you guys hit all the main, the best characters, which, like you said, none of them have much screen time except Woodcock, but and their charisma of the two leads. The only other thing I guess I would add is just, it's unnecessary, but when a comedy looks this good, it's appreciated.
Right. You have Conrad Hall, right? The all-timer.
Yeah.
And again, that's what bothered me. Well, I think it was Pauline Kael that said George Roy Hill isn't up to the task. Like, he was not only a major filmmaker, but also like he is a good director. Like, his stuff looks great. I mean, I watched The Great Waldo Pepper last night where he reteams with Redford as this like World War I style fighting ace, who's like doing aviation road shows and stunt flying. Those are some of the best like flying sequences I've ever seen on film. Like it's really good. Like the movie's good anyway, and you see Redford at his like most charming and kind of doing more of like the Newman thing that he did in this one. But I think it's worth checking out that film.
Yeah, I mean, so what did you think about some of those especially stylized things like the photo montage that gets them on their trip from the US to Bolivia, or that opening kind of old-timey film during the credits? Do you feel like those things work?
Well, the old-timey thing I definitely thought worked, and I think he does that again in Waldo Pepper, and I know you watched another George Roy Hill where he's playing with the kind of use of film within a film, right? Type thing. The move from America to Bolivia, I mean, there's a lot of conflict you could have put in there, right? And that would have been an interesting sequence. But I guess for the purposes of Goldman and George Roy Hill, they just wanted America, Bolivia, and nothing in between.
Right. I mean, presumably they had to do some lying and maneuvering in order to get themselves passage on this ship and the time that it takes to get there. And, as they have to travel from Wyoming or wherever it is that they are all the way to New York to get on the ship and perhaps are pursued during that period by the posse. And we don't see any of that. So it does seem like an area of their story that was maybe left out. But on the other hand, as you say, obviously for Goldman, what was really interesting was the time that they spent in Bolivia, and he wanted to get there. And we've already spent half the movie in the West. And so they just kind of move on. It did feel like at first when it started, I was like, oh, this is cool. And then it sort of went on longer than I felt like was necessary. If really the purpose of it is just like, hey, they were here and now they're here. And there's a lot of little images in there that I don't know that they're really doing a whole lot. But I appreciate the effort to do something different. And whether that was in the script or the script just cut from one thing to the next, either way, it's like, hey, let's put in something here that'll give audiences the information in a different way.
Yeah, I agree. Because we've seen that, time jump and done in very classic ways. And this at least had a little flair to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, should we rate this out of, 5 cliff jumps?
Sure. 5 cliff jumps, Josh. 3.5. So you're suspended in midair on that last cliff jump.
It's like a freeze frame right there.
That just happened.
Yeah. So I think all the criticisms we're kind of on the same page about. But again, like you have one of the finer filmmakers of the history of movies doing a movie with two of the best and most charismatic actors of all time with one of the greatest, if not the greatest screenwriter. It's tough not to like this one.
Yeah, I agree. I also will give it 3.5 cliff jumps out of 5. And I think too, that the criticisms are valid, or most of them that we've talked about. And I was more aware of them this time, but it still is just super entertaining. And, if you look at the way it's influenced other movies that are worse, in a way it makes it better because you can see how there's a way to do this that is good and is enjoyable. And, people are taking maybe the wrong lessons from this movie. So yeah, I still had fun with it. Dave, how would you rate it?
Completely agree with you guys. 3.5 from me too.
All right. Full agreement here on the podcast. That's always nice.
We're off to a good start for 1969.
Yes, we are. We'll come back and talk about the legacy of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this premiere of our season on the films of 1969, we're talking about box office champion Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And as I was saying earlier, I think part of the legacy is that critics were, I guess, really not that into it at first. And it's grown in its reputation, even though it was a huge hit and it was nominated for a bunch of Oscars. The overall reputation, I mean, this is frequently named as one of the greatest Westerns and even one of the greatest movies of all time. It's on a ton of those AFI 100 Years lists and a bunch of other ones as well. So, I mean, I think now this is an acknowledged full classic.
I agree with you. And I think we've talked about this before, but if you look at George Roy Hill's filmography, you're wondering why doesn't he get mentioned with the other huge filmmakers of the form, because we mentioned The Sting. We obviously did Slapshot. He's done Thoroughly Modern Millie and Slaughterhouse-Five. Like, he was a major filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it maybe was that his window of time when he made his biggest hits was fairly small, but I agree. And as you said, I did also happen to watch another George Roy Hill film, actually almost by accident. I was just looking through the Criterion channel at what was expiring at the end of this month, and this movie caught my eye. And then I realized, oh, it's George Roy Hill. It's called A Little Romance from 1979, and it's this kind of teen romance starring Diane Lane in her first role, with Laurence Olivier. It's weird to see the two of them in the same movie, as this kind of older con artist who helps these two teenagers in Europe as they're falling in love and trying to spend time together. And it's very, very charming. And you can see it's got a bit of influence, perhaps on Wes Anderson and Richard Linklater. And I enjoyed that possibly more than this, really. So, and that's not a movie that really is talked about at all. So I think you're right that maybe there are other gems in his filmography that people aren't paying attention to because he made those two towering movies.
Right. Well, I mean, and Slapshot, I think now is regarded, we did it as a cult classic, but a lot of people would say that's the best sports movie ever made. And easily one you could watch over and over again. Waldo Pepper, recommend, definitely check that one out too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what's fun too is that he's made these big films. In A Little Romance, part of the story is that the male character, who's this French teen, is like discovering the wonders of cinema, and especially American cinema. And he's always going to the movies. And there's a lot of sequences of him watching these great classics. And there he's watching, Humphrey Bogart and John Wayne. And George Roy Hill includes both Butch Cassidy and The Sting. And so to be able to put two of your own movies in there as part of this, like, here's the greatness of cinema. And I'm sure at the time viewers are like, yeah, okay, fair enough.
It's valid. It wasn't just a thing to do. I'm sure there's some ego to it, of course, but it's like, well, that like you're saying, that's fair.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, that's impressive. So, we definitely recommend those other George Roy Hill films and our episode on Slapshot.
Yeah, I was really tempted to watch it again, but I feel like I always want to watch Slapshot again. John.
Yeah, you're a big, huge fan of that film, and it was fine. This movie was also such a hit. I mean, Butch and Sundance, of course, are real people, and thus their story is in the public domain. But specifically to this film, there was a sequel that was made for TV in which Katharine Ross reprises her role as Etta and is the main character, called Wanted: The Sundance Woman, which came out in 1976. And then a prequel to this film that was a theatrical release called Butch and Sundance: The Early Days, directed by Richard Lester, with Tom Berenger and William Catt filling in as Butch and Sundance. Kind of a downgrade there, probably.
Well, what can you do, Josh? Also inspired the television series Alias Smith and Jones. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to say. Like, I think some of these things are meant to be official sequels or prequels or whatever, but because these characters can be used by anyone, it's, you can easily make it unofficial. I mean, they've been in multiple films. I was trying to look and see what else I've seen that uses these characters. There's a movie called Blackthorn starring Sam Shepard as Butch Cassidy that speculates the idea that he didn't die in the moment we see at the end of this film, and now he's like an old man in Bolivia. And most recently, I watched the Tubi original movie Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch from the director of the Sharknado films.
Was part of his bunch a shark?
It would have made it a better movie, I think.
Josh, I think you could do something here and, combine Butch and Sundance and the little Brokeback Mountain and, have some gay lovers on the run type thing. That might be an interesting thing.
Yeah, well, and of course, I mean, I know you're always accusing me of finding homoerotic subtext.
I think this one's fair.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, you go to Letterboxd and people will back me up here. This is the most common thing I think that people are talking about with this film.
In September of 2022, Amazon Studios said they were doing a television adaptation of the film starring Reg-Jean Page and Glenn Powell, with the Russo brothers attached to executive produce. And I think we can all agree it's good that never happened.
Yeah, hopefully that's not still in the works, because that sounds like a terrible idea all around.
Yeah, I think Glenn Powell's moved beyond that.
I hope that he has.
But Reg is probably still like, fellas.
Yeah, he was going to be the new big charismatic movie star, and that didn't quite happen when he left Bridgerton.
Yeah, well, I think the charisma might have stayed on Bridgerton.
Maybe so. We've talked about so many of these people involved, as you said. Paul Newman, of course, an icon. We talked about him in our episodes on Slapshot, as well as Cool Hand Luke, nominated for 9 Oscars and 1 for The Color of Money. I don't know if there's anything else to say.
I had 10 Oscar noms for him, obviously.
No, maybe I counted wrong.
Huge humanitarian. And Redford, we talked about only as a director, I think, because of Ordinary People, right? We haven't really talked about him as an actor before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we talked about his overall career when we did that episode, but he did just direct that film. Surprisingly, he never won an Oscar for acting, was nominated for The Sting, but I mean, of course, is a huge icon and had this long, long career, even as he got into his 60s and 70s, was still having lead roles in really good movies like All Is Lost and The Old Man and the Gun, and is seemingly basically retired from acting. I think his last on-screen role, speaking of the Russo brothers, was in a Marvel movie, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, All Is Lost, and I got to watch that movie, but I know he was upset that they didn't give him a proper Oscar campaign, because I think that was one that a lot of people thought he could have been nominated for.
Yeah, he's really good. Have you not seen that movie?
I haven't, and it's right up my alley. And of course he's really good because he's Redford. But yeah, I mean, isn't he supposed to make a movie with like another, like one of these like kind of 80-year-old actresses who's still working, like a Jane Fonda type, where they're like friends who just sleep in the same bed, so they have like some type of camaraderie.
I think they made that movie with him and Jane Fonda. Is that Our Souls at Night? I didn't see it.
Yeah, you're right. That they actually made that? I thought
they made that like 5 years ago or something.
I just inceptioned myself, guys.
Yeah, I'm nice. Pretty sure. I haven't seen it, but yeah, it's from 2017. Our Souls at Night, with him and Jane Fonda as lovers. I think it's a Netflix original movie, so that's why you didn't see it, because those movies don't actually exist. But
yeah. Hey, I mean, I obviously, if he's in his 80s and wants to stay, kind of low key, that's cool. But obviously, he could still bang out some more if he would be welcome to.
Yeah, of course. And he seems semi-retired. We should also say, of course, that he named the Sundance Film Festival after the Sundance Kid. And he also seems to have kind of stepped back from his role at Sundance, which, for many, many, many years, he's not only the figurehead of it, but really like a very active participant in shaping the direction of that festival. And I think that he's stepped away from that.
Well, and I could see why. I mean, when he bought Sundance, which was the U.S. Film Festival before that, right? It was all about indies, and we've talked about like kind of Soderbergh in '89 with Sex, Lies, and Videotaped. And now, is it about indies, or is it just about having stars and basically pre-sales? And it's not. It doesn't have the independent spirit it used to have. And so much so that they're talking about leaving Park City and relocating to a major, bigger city. And so I get that, Josh.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the reason, but those are valid criticisms of the festival. Katharine Ross, again, we talked about in our episodes on The Graduate and The Stepford Wives, and she had this kind of brief moment of these bigger roles, and then later transitioned more into TV and supporting roles, and has been more or less retired since the late 80s, except for some performances here and there. But I feel like she's underrated, as I think we probably talked about in both of those episodes.
Married to Sam Elliott.
Yeah, who is also in this film. Very
Where's
briefly.
The beef?
We talked about William Goldman in our Princess Bride episode.
We talked about all these people.
We have, yeah.
I think we're good.
Yeah, okay. Do we want to talk about the legacy of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, B.J. Thomas's biggest hit?
There you go. We haven't talked about that yet. Number 1 hit, right, Josh? Give us the legacy of that one.
Yeah, it was the number 4 song of all of 1970. So, that had this came out in late 1969. And so it had a lot of staying power, ultimately sold 2 million copies. And I feel like B.J. Thomas, this is really his signature song.
I agree. I mean, you had Bacharach and Hal David working on this together. Bacharach had 52 top 40 hits, Josh, including The Carpenters' Close to You, That's What Friends Are For, a classic from the 80s. the Arthur's theme. He has 6 Grammys, 3 Oscars, and 1 Emmy. And 2 of the Oscars were for this song and the score, like you said. Hal David also wrote a bunch of stuff on his own. What's New Pussycat? Do you know the way to San Jose? What's New Pussycat might have been both of them, but and also Always Something There to Remind Me.
Yeah. Lots of really cheesy songs, the classics, but in a certain mode. And I can't say that I really like this song.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Burt Bacharach.
The other random thing that I came to mind, and I don't know if this is on purpose or not, but they kept talking about La Force in this movie as this like formidable adversary or whatever. And for some reason, even though I haven't seen this movie in many, many, many years, it's stuck in my mind. The security guard in Kevin Smith's Mallrats is named La Force, and he's like the nemesis of Jay and Silent Bob. And I don't know if that's on purpose or not, but it made me think of it.
It sounds like, he's obviously a movie head. It could be that, or it could be a Star Wars reference because he loves Star Wars.
Either way.
Yeah. So that's my contribution there.
See, Josh, you always bring up Kevin Smith, not me.
Anything else you want to say about the legacy of this film?
Nope.
All right.
Hey, guess what? More Robert Redford to come.
Yeah. That's one more movie that we didn't mention that he also is in that we're going to get to very soon.
Yeah, let's just do a whole episode on it next
Why
week.
not? So that's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can pursue us online and on social media.
Oh, yeah, please. I just want to feel wanted. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. Eat This Comedy. We're back August 4th. At Echo and Rig in Henderson. That's going to be a great one. And you can find us at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on the platform that should have jumped off a cliff and never returned. Also, find me at Go for Jason on Letterboxd.
You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I'm at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on that platform, X Twitter, as well as on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think about any of the movies that we cover. And you can listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and come join our Wild Bunch gang, the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces Facebook group.
I should have mentioned this in the legacy, Josh. The Hole in the Wall gang was Paul Newman's camp that he created for all the kids out there. So that's another reference to the movie.
Oh, that's lovely.
Nice.
So, Jason, speaking of Robert Redford, what's in our next episode?
It's our first feature. It stars Robert Redford. It's directed by Michael Ritchie. It's called Downhill Racer.
So tune in next time for Downhill Racer. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.